Hello everyone. It's a pleasure to speak with you today. And I'm going to focus today's session on corn stand establishment, growth, and development. And I'd like to begin by starting out and talking a little bit about what we've went through this past spring. So I'll begin by talking about planting date. So this slide shows the average results of 26 planting date trials that were conducted across Minnesota from 2009 to 2016. In each of these trials, there were at least 4 planting dates. The left column shows different planting dates. The middle column shows the corn grain yield as a percentage of the maximum. And the right-hand column shows the average number of growing degree days accumulated since the first available planting date. And these results show that on average across these studies, that the highest yield occurred with a planting date between April 25 and May 12. With such planting dates, the number of growing degree days that had been accumulated since the first available planting date ranged from 31 to 137. When planting date was delayed beyond 140 growing degree days, or until May 13 to 19, yield was reduced by 2 to 3%. Thus, in a typical year, we can expect no yield loss until more than 140 growing degree days have accumulated since the first available planting date. So when we're thinking about planting date, we need to remember that there are many factors other than planting date that are more important for yield. Also, when we think about planting date, it's important to realize that for germination, seeds need to imbibe 30% of their weight in water, and we also need a soil temperature of at least 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And this imbibition of water occurs regardless of soil temperature. So if we plant very early, say like very early April or even March, and the soil is not frozen, that seed will imbibe water, but it'll just sit there. The germination process won't start. Another thing that we need to think about with regards to planting date is that we can have imbibitional chilling injury occur if soil temperature drops to 40 degrees Fahrenheit or lower within 1 to 2 days after planting. Therefore, it's important to consider what the soil temperature is going to do within 1 to 2 days after planting. If the soil temperature drops to such a low level after 1 to 2 days after planting, the risk of imbibitional chilling injury is much less. This slide shows the daily minimum and maximum soil temperatures during April of this year at Lamberton, Minnesota, which is in the southwestern part of the state. I'm showing the soil temps from Lamberton because only the daily average soil temp is reported for Waseca. Soil temps at Lamberton were likely similar to those at Waseca this year. And soil temperature is shown on the left-hand side of this figure, and it's shown for dates ranging from April 1 through May 1, and they're shown on the bottom. The blue line here represents the daily minimum soil temperature at 2 inches. And the gray line is the daily minimum soil temperature at 4 inches. In addition, the orange line is the daily soil temperature at 2 inches, the daily maximum. And the yellow line is the daily maximum soil temp at 4 inches. And this figure shows that the daily maximum soil temperature, or the daily minimum soil temperature, which is in blue, was often below 40 degrees Fahrenheit until after the morning of April 23. Thus, most corn planting did not occur until after this, and since a soil temperature of 40 degrees Fahrenheit or lower within 1 to 2 days after planting can cause risk of imbibitional chilling injury, that's why we didn't see a lot of corn planted before then. This figure also shows that also allows us to compare the daily minimum soil temp between 2 inches and a 4-inch depth. And we see that on April 20th to 22, that the daily minimum soil temp at 4 inches was about 2 degrees warmer than that at 2 inches. And this shows that soil temp does not drop as much at nights at the deeper soil depths. Thus, if one needs to plant a little deeper than normal in order to reach sufficient moisture, such as 2¼ inches or 2½ inches, a benefit is that there's greater insulation against the cold overnight temperatures. This slide shows the daily precipitation at Waseca during April and May of this year. The left side shows the precipitation amount, and the bottom part of the slide shows this for dates ranging from April 1 through May 31. And as Tom alluded earlier this year, April was unusually dry. And during dry spells, less than 0.2 inches of precipitation is typically considered ineffective because most of it evaporates before moving into the soil. From this figure, we see that the daily precipitation did not exceed 0.2 inches until May 6th, when there was 1/4 of an inch that fell. These dry conditions enabled corn planting to be completed soon after it started. Now, the 1/4 inch of rain that fell on May 6th was helpful, but that was about 10 to 13 days after planting. And given that the soils were dry, it would have been more ideal if we would have got a little more rainfall and if it would have occurred at about 5 to 7 days after planting. And another thing to see on this slide is that we did not really receive any other rainfall until about May 19th. Now, these dry conditions that we saw in April and May, they've contributed to uneven emergence in many fields and prolonged emergence period. Unfortunately, though, we were able to get timely rainfall between May 19th through the end of May. Now, uneven moisture in the seed zone is the #1 cause of uneven emergence. And that can be a result of many things, such as uneven depths of seed placement, tillage and residue patterns, and variable soil conditions. And I think there was more uneven emergence in corn this year than in past years, largely due to uneven soil moisture in the seed zone. And this hurts yield potential because those late emerging plants are going to be unable to access light, water, and nutrients as easily as the larger neighboring plants. Some strategies that improved uniformity of emergence when soils were dry at and after planting in this year was avoiding unnecessary tillage passes, preparing seed beds close to planting, not tilling deeper than needed, proper setting of the row cleaners to ensure that the residue is moved out of the row, and if needed, planting deeper to reach soil moisture, such as 2 1/4 inches or 2.5 inches. This slide shows the effects of uneven emergence on corn yield. It's based on a study that was conducted at Lamberton, Minnesota, where the researchers simulated uneven emergence by hand planting corn at different times. In this study, there was a final stand of 32,000 plants per acre in all treatments. The treatments are listed on the left-hand slide, and these included uniform emergence with all plants emerging early, and this was considered the control. There was also a treatment where there was a 1-leaf stage delay in emergence on every other plant. A third treatment was a 2-leaf stage delay in emergence on every other plant. And the last treatment was a final stand of just 16,000 plants per acre, where all of those plants emerged early. So essentially every other plant was missing. In this study, they measured the overall plot yield along with the yield of the early and late emerging plants for each plot. And what we see here is that yield is reported as a percentage of the control, or the uniform treatment where all plants emerged early. So let's start by looking at the yield of the late emerging plants. For plants that were 1-leaf stage behind their neighbors early in the season, their yield was reduced. It was only 80% of normal. And for plants that were 2-leaf stages behind their neighbors, their yield was only about 49% of normal. However, the early emerging plants were able to compensate some. This is because they had greater access to light, water, and nutrients. The early emerging plants yielded 107% of normal when the late emergers were 1-leaf stage behind, and the early emerging plants also yielded 118% of normal when there was a 2-leaf stage delay on every other plant. When we take these things into account and when we look at the overall plot yield of all plants, we see that it was 94% of normal when there was a 1-leaf stage delay on every other plant, 83% of normal when there was a 2-leaf stage delay on every other plant. In comparison, yield with a final stand of just 16,000 plants per acre was 73% of normal. So this indicates that if there is much more than a 2-leaf stage delay in emergence, the late emerging plants aren't likely going to contribute much to overall yield. These findings drive home the importance of uniform emergence. So now I'd like to shift gears and talk about corn growth and development, especially as it relates to this growing season. So right now, the corn is around the V10 stage. This is about 8 days ahead of normal. And at this time, corn will develop a new leaf collar every 2 to 3 days. And corn will produce about 18 to 20 leaves. At this time, corn is susceptible to green snap from V10 to silking because it's growing very rapidly. Silking is expected to occur around July 14th. And based on this, we can expect that maturity or black layer will be around September 12th, since there's typically around 60 days from silking to maturity. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about setting the potential ear size. So from the V5 to V8 stage, this is when the kernels per row is, the number of rows per ear is developed. So this is the number of rows around that are being developed. This is at the V5 to V8 stage. This is mainly influenced by genetics. From the V5 to V15 stage, that's when the number of potential kernels or ovules per row is being determined. So this is the potential ear length. Now this is a function of growing environment, management, and genetics. So drought stress during this time can have an effect on the number of potential ovules, or potential kernels or ovules per row. However, the actual number of kernels per row is dependent on the success of pollination and on the number of fertilized ovules that are retained. So in corn, the critical period for yield determination occurs from about 10 days before silking until 14 days after silking. And that's going to pretty much encompass most of the month of July. And if we assume a silking date of July 14, then our critical period would last from about July 2 to July 26. Drought and other stresses during this time will reduce yield more than at any other time. And the yield loss due to the stress is going to be more severe when it is closer to silking. If we have stress before tasseling, that can cause a delay between pollen shed and silking, resulting in some of the potential kernels not being fertilized. Between the blister and milk stages, stress then causes kernels to dry out and be lost. That typically results in kernels being lost at the ear tip. And if we have intense stress that occurs over a short period of time or longer, we can see kernel loss be anywhere along the length of the ear. In some cases, the corn ear can look like it has a zipper on it, where we have kernel loss along the side of it. When stress occurs between the dough and dent stages, that reduces the size of the kernels, but it does not affect the number of kernels. This table provides a generalization of the yield loss that might occur due to drought stress at different corn stages. And it's reported as a % yield loss per day of drought stress. The left column shows the corn stage, and the right column shows the yield loss for each day of drought stress at a given corn stage. Now for this table, the definition of drought stress is corn leaf rolling beginning in the morning. Now there are no values for drought stress occurring prior to V12, because when we have drought stress in corn prior to V12, it typically doesn't have a large negative effect on yield. It will reduce yield some, but it's relatively small. When we look at this table, it shows that yield loss is greatest when drought stress occurs at silking, and that yield loss is about 6.8% per day. That's followed by drought stress at the dough stages, which is for the blister through dough stages, which is at 4.2 to 4% yield loss per day, followed by the late vegetative stages at 3.2% per day, followed by the mid-vegetative or dent stages at 3.0% yield loss per day. Now these values are summarized from a couple different studies, and this was done by Joe Lauer at the University of Wisconsin. And I think these values are reasonable. They provide us an indication of the yield loss that might occur if we have short-term drought stress. But what I've found is that if we have continuous drought stress over many days, that the yield loss levels from this table tend to overestimate the actual yield loss. In 2013, my team conducted an intensive study on drought stress that was funded by the Minnesota Corn Research and Promotion Council. This study was conducted at the University of Minnesota Sand Plain Research Farm at Becker. And the soil there was a loamy sand in the 0 to 18-inch depth, and it was sand in the 18 to 42-inch depth. And we used drip irrigation to impose drought stress at different times. In this study, we had 3 different experiments in 2013 that were located within 0.3 miles of each other. Now, 2013 at Becker was a really good year to do a drought study because rainfall from the late vegetative stages through maturity was very rare. It was a very dry year at Becker. So it was a good year to impose different treatments using drip irrigation. In each of these 3 experiments, we looked at 18 different treatments. So we had 2 hybrids. Each of those 2 hybrids were exposed to 3 different levels of drought stress. And then those 6 combinations of hybrid by drought stress were each subjected to 3 different nitrogen rates. In this study, we had 2 hybrids. We used a drought-tolerant hybrid that was reported to have non-transgenic drought stress and maximum yield potential in all growing environments. We also used a comparable standard hybrid that was reported to produce maximum yield in optimum growing conditions. In this study, both hybrids had a final stand of 33,000 plants per acre. And in this study, each of the 3 hybrids were subjected to 3 durations of sustained moderate drought stress. Now, sustained moderate drought stress was characterized as daily leaf rolling beginning midday, except when there was rainfall or irrigation. And we had 3 different levels of sustained moderate drought stress. We had none, which represented a well-watered treatment. We also had a treatment where we had stress from R2 or the kernel blister stage until maturity. And then we had a treatment where we had sustained drought stress from V14, which is about 2 weeks before silking, until maturity. And then each of these hybrid by drought stress treatments were subjected to 3 different nitrogen rates, which were 50, 100, or 150% of the expected economically optimal N rate. And these are the results from the study. And this figure shows the grain yield in this study averaged across 3 nitrogen rates and averaged across 3 experiments. The left-hand side is the grain yield, and the bottom shows the 3 different levels of drought stress. The pink bars represent the standard hybrid, while the yellow bars represent the drought-tolerant hybrid. And bars with the same letter above them had yields that were not significantly different. Now, the numbers in the bars are the actual yield values. And for the 2 treatments on the right, I also have percentage values listed on those bars. And those percentage values in the bars represent the reduction in yield compared to the yield of the treatment with no drought stress for the same hybrid. In this study, sustained moderate drought stress from R2 to R6 reduced yield by 28 to 30%. And sustained moderate drought stress from V14 to R6 reduced yield by 30 to 36%. Now, when the drought stress occurred from V14 to R6, the drought-tolerant hybrid yielded 13 bushels per acre greater than the standard hybrid. However, there was no difference in yield between the 2 hybrids for the other 2 levels of drought stress. These findings provide us an indication of the level of yield loss that could occur with sustained moderate drought stress from either R2 to R6 or from V14 to R6. So thank you for attending this session, and I'm happy to address any questions or comments that you may have.
Hi, Jeff. That's really well done. We have one question in the Q&A, and it's, how does the current dry soil conditions of today compare to historical dry years at SROC 2021 versus 2012 and 1988, et cetera?
Well,
maybe that's something that you can't answer, but maybe Tom, if he's on, could.
That might be a better question for Tom. I think what's interesting about this year is that, it's dry, and, we're going to need timely rainfall to keep up with crop water use. Right now, the crop is using about 1/5 of an inch of water per day. And within a week or 10 days, the crop's going to be using about 1/3 of an inch of water per day. So we're going to go through that stored soil moisture quite quickly. And I think timely rainfall and good amounts of it is really going to be needed to avoid any potential yield loss. And I think we've already reduced some yield potential, but I'll turn it over to Tom.
Yeah, I've looked at that. Certainly when you mention hot and dry, everybody remembers 1988. And I've compared, and so far to where we are at this point, 1988 was hotter and drier. Hotter by about 100 growing degree units and drier by just maybe a half an inch. So we are rivaling 1988. Now, what I remember about 2012 is the dry summer came on later. We had decent soil moisture early, but it turned dry that summer and into the fall. So to compare to that remains to be seen. I especially appreciated Jeff's discussion about stress and leaf rolling before V10. We've seen a little leaf rolling. We've got by on stored soil moisture so far, and I'm kind of amazed by it. Now, Bruce Potter sent I don't have the chart, but he said we started this year with more soil moisture than some of those dry years. And I'll have to look at that. But I think so far, other than some sand lenses and eroded hillsides, we've bought enough time and we're looking pretty decent. The corn has good color to it too, and I hope Fabian and Jeff will talk a little bit about that. But so far, we are comparable to 1988, but no worse off.
Hey, Tom, what I would add is 2012, I know we started with adequate moisture in the early part of the season, and germination and uneven emergence was a non-factor. What we did, 1988, though, I believe we did start with a deficit early in the year.